Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. And this one will be generally my favorite video of the week. I'll be going over trade targets and trade away players. This will be my buy low and sell high video. I'll try to touch on players across each position as much as I can. I will normally try and highlight roughly 10 players, so 5 buy low, 5 sell high players. I might mix it up if there's some weeks where I think a lot of players stand out, then I might split this up into 2 videos. For the sake of this week, it's tough for me to really give super actionable advice because it is obviously after just 1 week, so I don't want to put you guys in a situation where you're overreacting to everything, but I think there's still a lot that we can do to make good decisions here. I've generally find that making trades is one of the best ways to improve your team over the course of the season. It's just a lot of fun as well. So if you're like me, you're trying to make trades all the time in all of your leagues, and I find that it generally is a really easy way for me to separate myself over the course of the season. So hopefully you guys find this video fun and enjoyable. If you guys do have any specific trade questions, I always love seeing what you guys are cooking up. So let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out, give you guys my opinions on all that, and yeah, should be a lot of fun. If you guys disagree or agree on any of these players, let me know as well, and just hopefully you guys learn something from this as well. So yeah, that being said, let's get into the first player. We'll start off with some players I'm looking to sell high on. Just starting off with what is to me the most obvious sell high candidate this week, it's going to be Stefon Diggs, who obviously put up a really solid performance, had over 21 PPR fantasy points last week, largely on the back of 2 short touchdowns. He was not a player that was targeted downfield very much, and I think that in general it's going to be tough for Stefon Diggs to be a guy that reliably finds the end zone. Nico Collins and Dell, they are certainly the guys that are being used much more downfield. You saw Nico Collins and Dell each end up with over 100 air yards in this one. For those of you who are unaware, an air yard is effectively the distance beyond the line of scrimmage that you're being targeted over the course of the game. Stefon Diggs had 7 targets and 9 air yards. So basically what you're looking at is a guy who is targeted at the line of scrimmage exclusively over the course of this game. And for a guy who, at this point in his career, is not going to be a huge yards after the catch kind of guy as well, it means basically that Stefon Diggs is going to be that short area possession receiver for this team. And that's valuable for the Texans, but it doesn't really give us a lot in fantasy. You're looking at a guy like imagine if Greg Dortch had 2 touchdowns for the Cardinals this last week. I'm not saying Stefon Diggs is as bad as Greg Dortch, but they have a really similar role in this offense here where you're going to get used close to the line of scrimmage. You'll look good if you score a touchdown, but you're not going to be a guy that's going to score touchdowns on a reliable weekly basis, especially when there's 2 just better receivers playing around you. I know Tank Dell had a down game this last week, but he was still utilized really heavily. He's still a stud. We'll talk more about him later, actually, but Stefon Diggs is the clear wide receiver 3 in this offense for me. I won't be shocked at all if this is the best game Stefon Diggs has all season, and he's coming off of an offseason where he was drafted pretty high. He's got a lot of name value. I bet you can get quite a bit for Stefon Diggs, and the reality is I just don't think he's going to be able to reproduce this very often. Moving on to another big-name wide receiver here, we've got Devonte Adams, who really just didn't put up that great of a game, and in a game script where the Raiders were actually trailing most of the game. You would have expected the Raiders to pass the ball quite a bit more in a game where they would have been playing from behind. You did see Gardner Minshew throw the ball 33 times and complete 76% of his passes. I don't think that's going to be a mark that we'll see Gardner Minshew keep up over the course of the entire season. And even with all that, Devonte Adams ended up with 6 catches for 50 yards. Not a killer for you, but that is not what you drafted Devonte Adams in the second round to produce here. And I think we saw just how bad this Raiders offense is going to be. They've got a bad quarterback. Mediocre offensive line. It's just going to be really difficult for this team to score a lot of points over the course of any sort of reliable stretch here. They've got a matchup with the Ravens this next week, an elite defense here. Adams is going to put up another rough game, and you're looking at a situation where the Raiders showed their hand. They're not an aggressive team. They had a 4th and 1 down 6 with 7 minutes left in the game and opted to punt, basically never got the ball back. That's the kind of team this team is. They're not going to take a lot of chances. They're not going to push the ball downfield, and they're not going to run hurry up. Air the ball out. That's not going to be what's going to happen here. And you needed Devonte Adams to be second in the NFL in targets last season just to barely finish as a top 12 wide receiver. This year, I fully expect things to get worse for him over the course of the rest of the year. Brock Bowers also looked legit. Coming into the game injured and putting up 6 catches for 58 yards is actually extremely impressive for a rookie tight end in his first game ever. He's only going to get more and more involved. I think he might end up being the only real value on this roster for where we drafted them at. So if you can still sell high on Adams, who wasn't necessarily a bust, there were a lot of receivers that busted a lot higher last week, and I don't think people are really focusing on Devonte Adams, but I'm certainly concerned here. I would trade him for any of the players that were drafted around him. I'd trade him for DK Metcalf. I would trade him for just any sort of solid wide receiver too. I think Adams is going to be a big disappointment this year, and I'm really concerned with what I saw last week, so I would certainly look to move on from Adams if I can. Moving on to a running back here, and this one might be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to talk about Rashad White, who really just didn't put up the kind of numbers that I was hoping he would put up in week one. He had about as easy of a matchup as you can have over the course of the entire season here. The Commanders are going to be one of the worst defenses in the NFL, and they really were. They gave up 4 passing touchdowns to Baker Mayfield, looked like an absolute shell of themselves, just really weren't competitive in this game. We still didn't see Rashad White put up any sort of solid numbers on the ground. And the concern there is that Bucky Irving actually looked really good. He had 9 carries for 62 yards in this one. White is not going to lose his role as the pass catcher in this offensive backfield here, but Bucky Irving is going to make this potentially a bit more of a timeshare than we expected. Obviously, Rashad White's still going to be the running back to own in Tampa Bay here, but the reason he was so valuable in fantasy last season is just because he had like a 90% opportunity share in this offense. I think you're going to look at something more like 65-35 here, maybe closer to 60-40, and that's going to be really huge for Rashad White, who is not necessarily a lock to have the goal line role in this offense. I don't think he specializes running between the tackles any more than Bucky Irving does. He will have the pass catching role. He's obviously elite at that. He's going to be a really talented player for them. He's still going to have some spike weeks here, but I think the possibility or opportunity here for Rashad White to be a top 10 running back, I don't really see that happening this season, and you probably paid a fringe top 10 price tag here, so he's probably just knocked down a tier or two for me the rest of the way. Not going to be bad. He'll be just fine, but I don't think that ceiling's there like it was last season. And if you can still get RB1 value for Rashad White, I think I would at least kick the tires on potentially moving him here. Next up, we've got one more running back on the sell high list here. It's going to be Ramondre Stevenson, who is the clear RB1 in New England, and he looked absolutely fantastic this last week. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but the issue here is just I don't know how often we're actually going to see New England win games. The Bengals just looked absolutely awful, and I don't think we're going to see a New England team that actually is good. I don't believe this week one performance is going to be indicative of the rest of their season. So you're looking at a guy in Ramondre who obviously had 30 plus touches this last week, absolutely capitalized on a really great game script, and he's a good player. I think he can still be like a fringe top 15 guy over the rest of the season, but if you can find someone who thinks he's going to be a top 10 running back like he was 2 seasons ago, I would absolutely just look to sell here. We did enter this game as well with Antonio Gibson being banged up. He was a bit of a game time decision, did suit up, but certainly that could have played into why Ramondre Stevenson had such a lion's share of the role here. Not saying he's not the RB1 here, but I think the opportunity share could come down a little bit if Gibson was a little bit healthier. And then we also really don't know yet who's going to be the running back that's just in the game if they're in hurry up, come from behind mode. Antonio Gibson certainly specializes as a pass catcher, and we didn't see the Patriots in a situation where they needed to air it out in this game. If that were to happen, Ramondre Stevenson, at least historically, has been really good through the air, and he's made up for a lot of his inefficiencies on the ground by being a really viable pass catcher. But if we see Gibson eat into that role, it's going to really limit Ramondre Stevenson's upside the rest of the way. So if you can capitalize on this performance, get RB1 value out of Ramondre, I would just take it because I think you probably saw his peak here in week one. And potentially the most controversial of these here, I'm going to put up one quarterback on the sell high list, and that's going to be Anthony Richardson. And this one's certainly tough. I've got Richardson in a couple leagues. It was obviously really exciting seeing him put up a monster performance here in week one. And I just think there's a lot of red flags here. Starting things off with the obvious, the accuracy was just obviously not there. He completed 9 of 19 passes, and there's really just no precedent for a quarterback being this inaccurate and still being a top tier option for fantasy. Obviously, you can be really good if you're rushing the ball and you're doing enough through the air. And the recipe here for Anthony Richardson is going to be explosive plays through the air and then a lot of production on the ground. And that's what we saw here in week one. It certainly could work out over the course of the season. And I do think that Richardson's still probably going to be a top 5 option at the quarterback position as long as he's healthy. But there are reasons that we could see some regression here. He had one of the best throws I've ever seen in week one here. If he misses on that, his week's completely different. If he gets stopped on the 4th down and 1, his week's completely different. Like, there's a lot of things that could have gone wrong here for Anthony Richardson, and we still saw him take a lot of hits. He had to lower his shoulder into a linebacker to score a touchdown near the end of the game. That is exactly how he got hurt last season, and if we see him needing to do that over the course of the entire season, I think it's going to be really tough to rely on him staying healthy over the course of the year. So if you can take this week 1 performance and trade him for a top 3 value, trade him for trade him for Kyler Murray and a really solid running back 2 or wide receiver 2. I'd absolutely do that because I think you're looking at a guy who, even though he's going to be really solid when he's healthy, I'm still not convinced he's going to be healthy over the course of the season. And I also think he potentially got a little bit lucky here in week 1 with his performance. So there's a lot of red flags here. Obviously, Richardson could just end up being the quarterback 1. You by no means have to trade him, but I'm just putting it out there that if you can get a haul for him, I would at least consider moving Richardson while he's still healthy and obviously coming off of a great game. Moving into the more fun side of things, let's talk about some buy lows here. I'll lead things off with Kyler Murray, who really just wasn't all that great for what we expect from him in week one. This was by far his toughest matchup in the first month. He leads the next 3 weeks off with the Rams, the Lions, and the Commanders. We just saw the Rams and Lions. Neither one of those defenses is really good at defending the pass. The Commanders, we just saw what they let Baker Mayfield do. Kyler Murray is going to have a really awesome next 3 weeks, and we also saw him be extremely mobile. That's great to see. I believe he had like 60 rushing yards in this last game, which is super optimistic here. That's what we want to see out of Kyler. It's going to give him that real ceiling that we drafted him to have. And on top of that, Marvin Harrison probably had the worst game he's going to have in his entire career with 1 catch for 4 yards. He's not going to play like that ever again. The Buffalo Bills are just a really good pass defense. Marvin Harrison maybe had some first game jitters here. Just wasn't a good outing for Harrison, but it's going to be fine here. I'm not worried about that at all. Kyler Murray still got really great weapons around him, and on top of that, the Cardinals actually held a lead in this one for a little bit. They actually kind of held the Bills' offense down for quite a bit. They got up to an early lead here, sort of went into a little bit of a conservative game script, ran the ball a lot more than they maybe should have, and sort of let the Bills back into it. I don't think the Cardinals are going to have a lot of large leads this season against the Rams, the Commanders. Both those teams should put up a lot of points against the Cardinals defense. I think there will be a lot of opportunity here for Kyler to put up points, and I think the game script's going to be better. The performance will be better. Matchups better, receivers are going to perform better. Everything should improve for Kyler after week one. And if we were, when we were looking at Kyler's first month of the schedule, we did sort of highlight that this first week could be a bit of a blip for him, but the next 3 weeks were going to be fantastic. We're sort of seeing that play out here. I wouldn't panic at all about Kyler. If you lost Jordan Love, I would make an effort to trade for Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray is going to be a guy that you could probably get relatively cheap right now, given that he was drafted right around that quarterback 10 area and really didn't put up a great week one. So he's certainly a really great target for you. For those of you that are quarterback needy right now. Next up on the buy low list here is going to be Kyren Williams, who was the running back 21 in the week, which obviously doesn't seem all that exciting, but there's actually a lot to be super thrilled about with Kyren Williams here. He had a 91% snap share. We did not see Blake Corum come on the field at all on offense here. The whole argument against Kyren Williams this entire offseason was that it's going to be a committee. We're going to see like a 70-30, 65-35 split between Kyren and Corum, and obviously that was going to cut into Kyren's workload, which was a really integral part of why Kyren was just so fantastic for fantasy last season, but we didn't see that at all. We're going to see Kyren be right back in that same role he was in last season. Puka Nacua going down to injury opens up even more opportunity for pass catching in this offense. You generally see when receivers get injured or leave a team, the running back position ends up being one of the prime beneficiaries of target share going forward just because guys aren't getting open. The check down option becomes a lot more dependent or reliable for this team. On top of that, I know he didn't necessarily put up a massive game on the ground, and in large part, that's just because the Lions' run defense is absolutely fantastic. If you remember back to the second half of last season, they had one of the best run defenses in the NFL. We certainly expect that to continue into this season with the additions they made at defensive tackle. The Lions are a really good run defense. It's going to be really tough to run in them all season. I wouldn't be worried about that at all. The workload is absolutely fantastic. We know Kyren's a good player, and I would absolutely look to capitalize on this for Kyren right now because I think he's going to be a top 5 running back the rest of the way. Gets a matchup against the Arizona Cardinals this week. Could easily go off for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns like he did last time they played them. I want to get Kyren on as many of my rosters as possible. I think he's going to be a stud. No concerns at all about Blake Corum. I want him on all my rosters, and I think you can still get him for relatively cheap. Next up, we've got Jonathan Taylor here, who had 100% of the team's running back touches. I know it didn't turn into a massive fantasy outing with just over 40 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. No receptions, and I know that there's a lot to be concerned about there, but the concerns here really, I'm not worried about them at all. He's got an elite workload in this offense. It's an offense that we expect to score a decent amount of points. They're going to be really up-tempo. The Texans are actually a really great defense. They've got a really elite young defensive line. They obviously added Danielle Hunter as well. There's a lot to expect out of that Texans defense going forward, so I wouldn't be too concerned about how much they held this team in check on the ground. And we're going to see here in week 2, the Packers are the opponent for the Indianapolis Colts. We just saw them allow Saquon to be the RB1 on the week. Don't be shocked at all if Jonathan Taylor comes out and puts up an RB1 finish this week. I think you could easily see 100-plus yards and 2 touchdowns in this one. Maybe he'll get a little bit more involved as a receiver. So, not worried at all about Jonathan Taylor if you can capitalize on the down performance. I doubt people are selling him for cheap, but if they are, I do view him as a top 6 or 7 running back the rest of the way. Someone I definitely want to get on my roster if I can. Next up at wide receiver here, we've got Tank Dell, who I am super stoked about still. We saw him Run the same number of routes as Nico Collins and Stefon Diggs, even though his snap share wasn't quite up there. Basically, in 2 wide receiver sets, or if they're passing, he's on the field. You're just not seeing Tank Dell out there blocking, which is actually great because that's how we saw Tank Dell get hurt last season. So if they're passing, Tank Dell's on the field. That's obviously what we want to see. He is utilized downfield a lot more than Stefon Diggs. He and Nico Collins are the clear downfield threats in this offense. I think they're going to sort of see 2 of these 3 wide receivers every single week alternate between being really good. And I think more often than not, it's going to be Tank Dell and Nico Collins that put up those big games. He's going to be a rock solid wide receiver 2 the rest of the season. I think a lot of managers, though, are going to be concerned that Stefon Diggs could be the wide receiver 1 or 2 here. He's not. I talked about it when I talked about selling high on Diggs. He had 9 air yards. He's not a guy they're using downfield. Tank Dell looks great. He's going to be featured in this offense, and I want to get a lot of Tank Dell before he puts up one of those vintage Tank Dell games where he goes off for 7 catches, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns, because one of those games is coming in the next several weeks, and I want to get Dell on my roster before it happens because he's going to be super tough to acquire after it does. And the last player on this list for me is going to be DK Metcalf, who I really am still super optimistic about this season. I will note that week 2 might be another tough matchup here. He's got a matchup against New England that really held the entire Bengals offense in check, and Jamar Chase didn't do a whole lot either. He only had 6 targets, so there is the possibility here for DK Metcalf to get off to an even slower start and potentially enter week 3 after 2 straight bad performances. But after that, he gets matchups against Miami, Detroit, and the Giants. We saw just how great those matchups can be for wide receivers in this last week. Those are defenses that we're probably going to be wanting to be targeting over the course of this season. And I still think that DK is going to be a fringe top 15 wide receiver this season, despite the fact that he's probably going to have a rough first 2 weeks. So I think if you want to wait on DK Metcalf, I would go to the manager that has him, mention that you're interested, sort of put a lowball alpha out there, see if they take it. If they don't, you can come back next week after a predictable bad game, say, hey, I'm still interested. You can probably get him for pretty cheap. I do find that's one of the best ways to get a trade done is express interest in a player before a down week, and then when that down week happens, it's pretty easy to get them because they've already sort of in their mind thought about trading him, and then he put up a dud. Now it's a lot easier to get them off their roster. So keep that in mind with Metcalf. I'm not worried about him at all. Even if he puts up a bad game here in week 2, I think he's going to be a rock star for us down the stretch. So that'll do it for the week 1 trade video here. Again, as always, if there are any specific players I didn't mention that you feel like should have been on this list, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you guys have any trades of your own you're cooking up, you want my opinion, feel free to let me know in the comments as well. I'll be happy to give you guys my opinions on those. Up next, I'll be going over starts and sits, so I'll go through every single game in week 2, go over which players I think should and shouldn't be in your starting lineup, so make sure you guys don't miss that. I'll be uploading that one probably Thursday morning, so that way you guys can get access and make sure you can make decisions relevant to the Thursday Night Football game between the Dolphins and the Bills as well. On Sunday mornings as well, I'll be doing a live stream going over last-minute start-sit questions, updates to injuries, and all that. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of that, just make sure you subscribe to the channel. That way I can be here all season long to help you guys win your leagues. Beyond that, if you're already subscribed, just help me out by giving this video a thumbs up. I put a lot of time into these, really helps me out, helps me know that you guys are appreciating the content and all that. So yeah, I appreciate you guys a lot. It's super awesome. We're moving into week 2, and hopefully you guys are ready, rocked and rolling, and ready to get your teams poised for another win here in week 2. So appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you with the next one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.